The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint hum of machinery from Eli's monitors. Rose sat in a chair at the far corner of the war room, her sharp eyes scanning the room as though she could find an escape route. Her usual confidence was there, but it was thinner, stretched, and strained. Eliana, standing by the holographic map, noticed the tension in Rose's posture. The fire mage's hands were balled into fists, her nails biting into her palms as though she were holding something back. It was a side of Rose that none of them had ever seen before, one that suggested cracks in the armor she so meticulously maintained. "Rose," Eliana said gently, stepping forward. Her voice was soft, but it carried the kind of authority that could not be ignored. "Walk with me." Rose's eyes flicked up, narrowing slightly. What? To a dungeon? Maybe a fiery pit of judgment? Eliana didn't smile, but her gaze softened. No, just a walk, away from the eyes and ears of this room. Gunnar, leaning against the table with his arms crossed, caught Eliana's glance. He gave a faint nod, signaling his approval. Rose hesitated, then rose from her seat, her shoulders tense as she followed Eliana out of the room. The workshop's grounds were quiet under the stars. Eliana led Rose along a hidden trail toward the river, its soft gurgle the only sound breaking the stillness. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. For a while they walked in silence, the light from the distant wolves' patrols flickering like fireflies. Rose finally spoke, her voice sharp but tinged with an edge of weariness. "You're wasting your time, you know," she said, her tone biting. "I don't do heart-to-hearts." Eliana smiled faintly, her hands clasped loosely in front of her as they walked. "You've done much in your life, Rose, but I wonder, have you ever truly unburdened yourself?" Rose stopped abruptly, crossing her arms. "Is this your grand guardian wisdom? Get the broken fire mage to cry and call it a victory?" Eliana turned to face her, her piercing blue eyes calm but unyielding. "No victory, no pity, only truth." Rose scoffed, but her shoulders sagged, the weight of her words heavy. "Truth? You want truth?" She laughed bitterly, pacing a few steps away. "Fine. Here's your truth. I've spent my entire life clawing for control, over people, over situations, over myself, and now—" She gestured angrily at the bracelet on her wrist. "Now I have nothing." Eliana tilted her head, her voice soft but steady. "You have more than you think." Rose's laugh was hollow. "Do I? Look at me. Once people feared me, respected me. Now I'm nothing more than a powerless relic, trying to bargain with scraps of information just to stay relevant." "You've survived," Eliana said, stepping closer. "Not by magic, but by will, by wit. That is something no power can take from you." Rose's lips parted as though to fire back a retort, but her words faltered. She looked away, her voice breaking. "I don't know who I am anymore." Eliana placed a hand on Rose's shoulder, her touch light but grounding. "You are a woman who has faced the abyss and come through the other side. The bracelet didn't strip you of your identity. It revealed it. You have learned to stand without the crutch of power, to rely on your strength of mind and character." Rose's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back furiously. "And what has it gotten me? Humiliation. Loss." "No," Eliana countered, her voice firm. "It has given you clarity. The Rose standing here now is more than the one who wore her magic like a shield. She is sharp, resilient, and capable of forging her path not through fear, but through trust." Rose shook her head, her voice trembling. "Trust? Do you know how many people I've trusted? How many of them turned on me?" "I know," Eliana said softly, "but trust is not about guarantees. It's about choosing to believe, even when it is hard. And I believe in you, Rose." Rose swallowed hard, the vulnerability in her eyes raw and unguarded. "Why? Why do you care?" Eliana's gaze didn't waver, because I see a woman standing at a crossroads. One path leads back to chaos and isolation, the other to something greater, a chance to build, to belong. Rose was silent for a long moment, her hands clenching and unclenching as though she were waging an internal war. Finally, she looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can. You can, Eliana said, her voice gentle but resolute. But only if you choose to. Rose hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, she said, her voice steadier. But don't think this makes us friends? Eliana smiled faintly. Of course not, but it makes us allies. For now. The night was still as Rose and Eliana strolled along the riverbank, the faint glow of the moon casting silvery ripples across the water. The quiet hum of nature surrounded them, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in Rose's chest. She walked with her arms crossed, her usual air of confidence faltering. I don't think I've ever felt this small, Rose admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a startling confession, one she wouldn't have dared make to anyone but Eliana. It's like everything I've worked for, everything I've fought for, is slipping through my fingers. Eliana regarded her silently for a moment, her serene expression betraying nothing. The Guardian's grace was an imposing presence, but tonight it felt like a comforting one. You've lost something important to you, Eliana said gently. Not just your magic, but your sense of self. The version of you that thrived on chaos and control is being challenged. Rose scoffed, kicking a loose stone into the water. You think I haven't noticed? I've been clawing my way out of pits since the day I was born. But this is different. That bracelet... Her voice faltered as she glanced down at the intricate runes carved into the silver band. It's not just a leash. It's a reminder that I wasn't strong enough. Eliana stopped, turning to face her. The moonlight caught in her platinum hair, making her seem otherworldly. It's not about strength, Rose. It's about what you do when you're at your weakest. That's when true character reveals itself. Rose looked away, the weight of Eliana's words settling over her. She clenched her fists, her voice cracking. Do you know what it's like to be powerless, to stand there while everything you've built is stripped away? Yes, Eliana said simply. The single word was a heavy truth, carrying centuries of pain and resilience. But I also know what it's like to rebuild, to rise stronger not for the sake of power but for purpose. Rose swallowed hard, her usual snark nowhere to be found. And what if I don't know how to do that? You do, Eliana said with quiet certainty. You've already begun. A faint shimmer surrounded Eliana's hands as she raised them, the gentle glow of her magic casting soft shadows around them. Rose froze, her breath catching as the faint pressure of the bracelet eased, the dampening effects fading away. What are you doing? Rose whispered, her voice trembling. Eliana's voice was steady. Restoring your power. Rose felt the surge immediately, the familiar heady rush of magic coursing through her veins. It was like taking a deep breath after being underwater for too long. Her hands glowed faintly with her fire magic as she flexed her fingers, her emotions surging alongside the energy. But just as quickly as the power returned, she noticed something else. The bracelet was still there, its runes faintly glowing. The dampening was gone, but the weight of its presence remained. Rose's expression darkened, her gaze snapping to Eliana. What's this? Some kind of half measure? Eliana's expression softened. The bracelet remains, not as a punishment, but as a symbol. It was Gunnar who placed it on you, and it will be Gunnar who removes it. But only when you've proven to him, and to yourself, that you've earned it. Rose's anger flared briefly, her fire sparking at her fingertips. Prove myself to Gunnar, that arrogant bastard who can't stand me? Yes, Eliana said firmly. Because it's not just about him, it's about showing that you can rise above your pride and your fear, that you can be more than what you've been. Rose's fire dimmed as her shoulders slumped, the weight of Eliana's words settling over her. And what if I can't? Eliana placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, her gaze unwavering. Then you'll try again, and again, until the day you realize you were never as powerless as you thought. The two women stood in silence for a long moment, the river's quiet murmur filling the space between them. Rose's fingers brushed against the bracelet, her expression a mix of defiance and vulnerability. I hate him, you know, she muttered. Gunner! Eliana smiled faintly. Perhaps, but you also respect him. And that, Rose, is where you'll find your strength. As they turned back toward the workshop, the fire in Rose's heart burned a little brighter, not with anger, but with determination. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that redemption wasn't out of reach. And as much as she hated to admit it, Eliana's faith in her was a spark she couldn't ignore. As they returned to the workshop, the tension between them had eased, though Rose's walls hadn't completely come down. She glanced at Eliana as they neared the door. You know, for a guardian, you're not half bad. Eliana chuckled softly. And for a fire mage, you're stronger than you realize. Rose smirked faintly, but the warmth in her eyes was unmistakable. For the first time in a long while, she felt lighter. And perhaps, just perhaps, a little less alone. Eliana and Rose walked side by side through the dimly lit hallways of the workshop, their soft footsteps echoing against the stone walls. Rose, now restored with her powers but still bearing the magic dampening bracelet, radiated an almost unfamiliar vulnerability mixed with her usual defiance. As they approached the war room, Eliana cast her a brief, measured glance. Remember, Eliana said quietly, her voice gentle but firm, this isn't about pride. It's about trust. They deserve the truth. Rose gave a sharp exhale, her trademark smirk faltering for just a moment. Trust is a funny thing, isn't it? You're asking me to gamble with something I've spent lifetimes avoiding. Perhaps it's time to stop avoiding, Eliana replied softly. Perhaps it's time to rebuild. The door to the war room swung open and the atmosphere shifted instantly. Gunnar stood near the table, his cybernetic fingers tapping rhythmically against his arm. Darren was leaning back in his chair, his boots propped up on the table, a sharp grin already playing across his face. As the two women entered, the room fell silent, Gunnar's piercing blue eye locked on Rose, his expression unreadable but heavy with expectation. Darren tilted his head, his grin widening as he gestured toward Rose with mock theatrics. Well, well, if it isn't our favourite firecracker, back from her heart-to-heart with Eliana. Did she give you a lecture, or just let you cry it out? His tone was biting but laced with humour. Rose shot him a look that could melt steel. Oh, Darren, darling, I didn't realise you cared. Enough, Gunnar said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. His gaze shifted to Eliana. You removed the dampening, didn't you? Eliana nodded, stepping forward calmly. I did, but the bracelet remains. She has her magic restored, but the bracelet serves as a reminder. Rose knows what's at stake. Do I? Rose murmured, her smirk returning faintly. But the weight in her eyes betrayed her unease. Gunnar's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. Eliana, I trust your judgment, but this isn't just about Rose. If this goes wrong, the consequences fall on all of us. I'm aware, Eliana said, her tone unwavering, but I believe Rose understands the gravity of this better than anyone. Rose raised her hands in mock surrender, her voice dripping with sarcasm. All right. Let's skip the scolding and get to the juicy part, shall we? You want information? I'll give you information. She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping across the room. The raid you pulled off the other night? That wasn't just some random stash. That was the last of the drug supply Ravina had. I'd say you've officially made yourselves her #1 target. The room tensed at her words, the weight of the revelations sinking in. Darren straightened in his chair, his smirk replaced with genuine concern. "And how do you know this?" Gunnar asked, his tone low and measured. Rose shrugged, her expression calm but her voice edged with frustration. "Because I pay attention, Gunnar. Ravina's no fool. She's methodical, and she doesn't waste resources. That drug wasn't just some tool for chaos. It was her leverage, her way of keeping her pets under control. And now it's gone." "And you think she'll retaliate?" Gunnar asked, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of his position. Rose met his gaze, her smirk faltering slightly. "Oh, she won't just retaliate. She'll escalate. Ravina doesn't lose gracefully." Darren let out a low whistle, leaning forward. "Great. So we've got a demigod with a grudge. That's just what we needed. Got any other bad news for us, Rose?" Rose hesitated, her sharp wit momentarily dulled. She glanced at Eliana, then back at Gunnar. "Only this. Ravina's watching. She's got eyes everywhere, and she's playing a long game. If you think you've seen her worst, you're wrong." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone. Gunnar's expression hardened, his mind already working through the implications. "And what do you want in return for this information?" he asked finally, his tone sharp. Rose tilted her head, her smirk returning faintly. "Oh, nothing much, just a seat at the table. If we're dealing with Ravina, you'll need someone who understands her game." "And can we trust you?" Darren asked, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Rose met her gaze, her smirk fading. For the first time there was no sarcasm, no deflection, just honesty. "You'll have to decide that for yourselves. But if you want to beat Ravina, you'll need me." The room remained silent, the decision hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Gunnar nodded, his voice firm but cautious. "All right, Rose, you're in. But understand this. If you cross us, the bracelet stays, and I won't hesitate to make it permanent." Rose's smirk returned, but her eyes held a flicker of something deeper. Respect, perhaps, or gratitude. "Understood, Alpha. Let's see how far this trust thing gets us." The tension eased slightly, but the weight of the coming battle remained. As the team prepared for what lay ahead, one thing was clear. The fight against Ravina was only just beginning. The war room was quiet save for the faint hum of monitors and the occasional shuffle of papers. Rose stood by the large central table, her arms crossed, her sharp gaze darting between the members of the pack. The weight of the earlier revelations lingered in the air, but Rose wasn't one to dwell. "I want to see my people," she said, breaking the silence. Her tone was firm, tinged with a rare vulnerability. "If we're truly trying to build trust here, then let me see them." Gunnar studied her, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Eliana and Darren exchanged glances, the tension palpable. "You're in no position to make demands," Gunnar replied, his voice low but steady. "But, fine. Clara's with them now, I'll take you." Rose's lips twitched into a faint smirk. "I knew you had a heart under all that gruff exterior, Gunnar." He didn't rise to the bait, motioning for her to follow. Darren fell in step behind them, his ever-present smirk hinting at his anticipation for whatever chaos might unfold next. The door to the conference room opened with a soft creak, revealing Caleb, Evelyn, and Argos seated around the table. Clara leaned casually against the wall, her watchful eyes flicking toward the newcomers. As Rose stepped into the room, all three of her people sat up straighter. Caleb's eyes widened, relief flooding his expression. "Rose?" "Caleb," she replied, her tone softening for the first time that night. Her gaze moved to Evelyn and Argos, taking in their wary but unharmed states. "You all look intact." "Good." Evelyn frowned slightly. "We're fine. Surprisingly, they've been..." "Decent," Argos interrupted, her tone flat. "Though I wouldn't exactly call this a 5-star experience." Clara arched a brow, but Rose's smirk deepened as she stepped further into the room. I'm sure it's been an adjustment, she said lightly, her eyes flicking to Clara. But I can see you've been accommodating. Clara's expression didn't waver. We're not in the business of unnecessary hostility. Glad to hear it, Rose replied before turning back to her people. Her smirk faded, replaced by a more serious expression. Look, I need to say something. Rose extended her hand toward Caleb, Evelyn, and Argos, her fingers curling slightly. A faint, shimmering glow emanated from her palm, subtle but unmistakable. A brief flicker of magic. It was enough to make Caleb's eyes widen in recognition and for Evelyn to stiffen. You've got your power back, Evelyn murmured, her tone both surprised and wary. Rose let the glow fade, her smirk returning. Let's just say, arrangements were made, but that's not the point. Argos tilted her head, her sharp eyes narrowing. What is the point? The point, Rose said, her voice steady now, is that everything you've done here, everything you've been through, it's on me. I sent you to learn what you could, to watch, to gather information. And in hindsight, I see how badly that could have gone. She stepped closer to the table, her gaze sweeping over her team. You followed my orders. You trusted me. And now I'm here to make it right. Rose's admission hung in the air, the weight of her words settling over the room. Caleb leaned forward, his brows furrowed. So, what now? Are we done playing spy games? Yes, Rose replied firmly. We're done. These people, she gestured to Clara and the others by the door, aren't our enemies. They're complicated allies, maybe, but they're not what I thought they were. Evelyn exchanged a glance with Argos, her expression skeptical. And, we're just supposed to take your word for that? Rose's smirk returned, tinged with exasperation. Yes, darling, because I'm standing here, aren't I? If they wanted us gone, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Clara straightened, her calm voice cutting through the moment. Rose is right about one thing. Trust takes time, but it starts here. If you want to walk out of here tonight with your heads held high, it's your choice. No one's holding you here. The room remained thick with tension. Caleb, Evelyn, and Argos watched quietly as Rose stood across from Gunnar, her usual smirk subdued but present. Gunnar's expression, however, was anything but amused. His piercing blue eye bore into her, unreadable yet commanding. The air between them felt as though it could snap at any moment. Rose spoke first, her voice sharp but measured. So, we're done here then? My people and I can leave? Gunnar's jaw tightened. His arms crossed over his chest. He gave a small, reluctant nod. You can go, but let me be clear, stay off our land unless invited. Next time, there won't be warnings. Rose's smirk curled higher, her tone laced with mockery. Noted, Alpha. Before she could step back to her team, Darren's voice cut through the tension like a blade, smooth and disarming. Wait a minute. All eyes turned to him as he stood, his casual demeanour masking something deeper. His dark eyes gleamed with the kind of confidence only he could pull off. This isn't how this ends, Darren said, his voice firm but not harsh. Rose, Gunnar, you two need to shake on this. Rose let out a dry laugh, crossing her arms. Shake on it. You must be joking. Darren stepped forward, closing the space between them with ease. Not even a little. You two are the leaders here. If we're moving forward, if we're calling this a truce, it starts with you. Gunnar's frown deepened, his cybernetic hand twitching at his side. Darren, I don't need— Yes, you do, Darren interrupted, his tone carrying an edge of authority. This isn't just about you or her, this is about the pack, and whether you like it or not, Rose has earned her place here tonight. Rose arched an eyebrow, her smirk fading slightly as she studied Darren. You're awfully sentimental for someone who usually thrives on sarcasm. Call it practicality, Darren shot back, his grin returning. Or maybe I just enjoy watching you squirm. The room was silent for a moment, all eyes on Gunnar and Rose. Finally, Gunnar exhaled sharply, stepping forward, his gaze locked with Rose's, his expression cold but not unkind. "This doesn't mean I trust you," he said flatly. Rose smirked, tilting her head. "The feeling's mutual." Slowly, deliberately, Gunnar extended his hand. Rose hesitated for a fraction of a second before clasping it with her own. The handshake was firm, unyielding, two forces acknowledging one another without bending. "Pack made," Darren said, his voice carrying a note of finality. As the handshake ended, Rose stepped back toward her people, a glimmer of respect flickering in her dark eyes. Caleb, Evelyn, and Argos exchanged glances, uncertain but intrigued by what they'd just witnessed. Aeliana, standing quietly near the doorway, offered a small, approving nod. Mylorian remained impassive but observant, his presence a steady anchor in the room. Gunnar turned to his team, his voice steady and commanding. "We're done here. Let's regroup in the morning." Rose gave one last glance over her shoulder as she and her team moved to leave. "You're not as insufferable as I thought, Alpha. Maybe this could work." Gunnar didn't respond, but his silence carried a weight that left the room lingering in thought. As Rose and her team moved toward the exit, the pack began to disperse, tension slowly bleeding from the air. But as Argos stepped past Aeliana and Mylorian, the two guardians exchanged a glance. Aeliana's serene expression softened further, while Mylorian's sharp gaze lingered on Argos with quiet scrutiny. "Argos," Aeliana said gently, her melodic voice carrying a weight of authority. Argos hesitated, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly as she turned to face the elf. "What?" Argos's tone was defensive, though not aggressive. She folded her arms across her chest, trying to mask her unease. Aeliana stepped closer, her ethereal presence both calming and disarming. "You carry something with you," she said softly, "something ancient and powerful." Mylorian inclined his head, his voice steady but firm. "Its magic radiates from you, even as you try to conceal it. You may not understand it fully, but it is not something to be ignored." Argos stiffened, her claws flexing at her sides. "I don't know what you're talking about," she snapped, though her voice betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. Aeliana smiled faintly, unbothered by the deflection. "You don't need to admit it to us, but know this. When you are ready to face it, ready to understand its origins and its purpose, we can help you." Argos blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected offer. Her sharp features softened for a moment before she quickly masked her surprise with a smirk. "You think I need your help, elf?" "Not need," Aeliana corrected gently, "but you may find it valuable. The choice will always be yours." Mylorian stepped forward, his presence as commanding as ever. "Whatever you carry, it is tied to a larger thread. A thread that will eventually pull you into something greater than yourself. Deny it if you wish, but it will not be denied forever." Argos's smirk faltered, her sharp eyes darting between the two guardians. For the first time in a long while, she felt exposed, not by malice or force, but by understanding. It unnerved her more than she cared to admit. "I'll think about it," she muttered finally, her tone begrudging. "That's all we ask," Aeliana said with a nod, her expression warm but serious. "And when the time comes, you know where to find us." As Argos rejoined Rose and the others, her thoughts were uncharacteristically scattered. Caleb glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "You good?" "Yeah," Argos replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "Let's just get out of here." Rose, now fully in command of herself and her team, gave one final glance over her shoulder at Gunnar and the pack. Her eyes flickered briefly to Aeliana, a faint trace of curiosity crossing her features before she pushed it aside. Outside, the night air was cool and quiet as they made their way back to their vehicle. But as the car started and the headlights pierced the darkness, Argos couldn't help but glance back at the workshop, her mind lingering on the Guardian's words. Aeliana and Mylorian watched from the shadows of the war room's doorway, their expressions unreadable as the car disappeared down the gravel road. "Do you think she'll return?" Mylorian asked finally, his voice low. Eliana tilted her head, her gaze thoughtful. "In time," she said, "when she's ready." As the door shut behind Rose and her team, Darren leaned back against the wall, his arms crossed and a satisfied grin on his face. "Well, that was fun." Clara rolled her eyes, muttering, "You live for this chaos, don't you?" "Absolutely," Darren replied, his grin widening. Gunnar shook his head, his gaze distant as he spoke. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." "No," Eliana said softly, stepping closer to him. "But it's a start." The pack began to disperse, the tension easing as the night wore on. Outside, the stars sparkled against the inky sky, a quiet reminder of the battles won and the ones still to come. In the war room, Gunnar stood alone for a moment, his thoughts heavy but resolute. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, the pack had taken a step forward, together.
All right, you've made it this far. That means either you like what you're seeing, or you're lost. Either way, no harm in sticking around, right? Go on, hit that subscribe button, join the team, and while you're at it, hit like, because, let's be honest, you're already invested. And the bell? That's for you if you don't want to miss any of the action. You wouldn't want me to come find you. See you soon, and remember, once you're in, you're family.